This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, folks. Hello. Welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Shaq Scott, and boy, oh boy, folks, do we have a great show lined up for you this evening. There is a huge night of sports ahead of us happening just tonight, and a huge weekend of sports ahead for us this upcoming weekend. I'm reporting to you live post St. Patrick's Day. Hope everyone enjoyed their St. Patrick's Day this past Wednesday. I'm recording on a Thursday, March the 18th, which is just in time for one of the most exciting times of the year, March Madness. Speaking of March Madness, today's show, we got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to top things off with the topic of the NCAA tourney. The men's tourney kicks off this evening with the first four matchups starting. Then we're going to get into the topic of COVID-19 protocols and how those may be kind of loosened and coming to an end potentially in the NBA. We're also going to cover Deshaun Watson and how he's making some noise down in Houston, and not the type of noise you would be expecting. And then finally, we're going to end the show off with our top 20 countdown of the greatest upsets in history in honor of the NCAA men's tournament. But like I said before, guys, thank you guys for checking us out. We appreciate you for listening, however you may be listening. We're just happy for you to be here with us this evening. We've got a great show lined up for you, so let's get started. I hope you guys can hear that. I know I can. Well, if they weren't so litigious, we probably could play the music right now, but we're not even going to play that game. But it's the One Shiny Moment song playing in my head right now. I don't know about you, whether it's the version that was written in the 80s or whether you're a person like me who enjoys the Luther Vandross version of it. One Shiny Moment is playing everywhere, all across TVs right now as the NCAA tournament kicks off this evening, Thursday. At the time of this taping of this podcast, Drake and Wichita State just faced off, and actually our first game that we got of the evening of the NCAA tournament, the game was decided by less than a point. Drake took the win over the Wichita State Shockers in a shocking fashion, no pun intended, beating them by 1 point. This is the first win for Drake in over 50 years, 50 years. They came into the tournament, I should say, with over 25 victories, which is a very impressive season for them nonetheless. But this is the first NCAA tournament win for them in over 50 years by picking up this first four victory. So shout out to Drake, and I'm not talking about the rapper. Unfortunately, the Wichita State Shockers are going to have their season ended a little bit early, but that's a part of the NCAA tournament and what makes March Madness so great. Still ongoing right now at the moment. We got Texas Southern facing off against Mount St. Mary's, Appalachian State and Norfolk State, and then UCLA and Michigan State still to face off this evening. So as you can see, it's a pretty eventful and packed night we got just on this Thursday and in time of the taping. So very, very exciting NCAA tournament for us to see. And if the first game was any testament to what we should be expecting, we're in for a great tournament. As we go into the tournament, though, I'm very excited, man. My favorite time of year, one of my favorite times of years. I remember as a kid, begging my mom to put every single television on in the house to watch the NCAA tournament, because one of the cool things about the NCAA tournament is that it's not, since Turner Sports and CBS split the duties of it, it's not all broadcast, well, for the men's side at least, it's not all broadcast on one central station. So some may find that annoying. Me, I kind of get a joy and pleasure out of that. it equals for a different broadcasting experience. So you got some games that are on True TV, TNT, and then you got the important games as we get later into the stages of the tournament that are directly on CBS. It's a great experience, and I look forward to it every single year, and I'm expecting this tournament to be one for the ages, to say the least. Thus far, it has been, and the Cinderella stories are what we're all looking out for. When it comes to this tournament, though, we will be remiss if we didn't mention the dark cloud that's hanging over it. This is our first NCAA tournament post-pandemic, and I say that in quotations, post-pandemic, because we aren't out of the waters yet. But this is our first NCAA tournament that we're trying to go full-fledged in the middle of this pandemic. For those of you that were living under a rock last year, maybe quarantined and just have forgotten, it's been such a long year, and it feels like last year's rolling over into this year, and I can't blame you, that you may have forgotten that we didn't get an NCAA tournament last year. I know the NBA managed to finish out their season at latter stages in a bubble. The NFL managed to push through and get a season going. But the NCAA ended up getting a season. But NCAA football, I should say. But the men's March Madness tournament did not happen last year. This happened at the very peak of the pandemic. So right in the middle of March is when everything started to shut down. And one of the biggest things that we got taken from us was the NCAA tournament. And a lot of seniors and juniors, sophomores, freshmen, a lot of people didn't get a chance to experience this tournament. So hopefully some of those that didn't get to experience last year get the opportunity this year. I know there are a lot of teams that wished they had the chance to represent their schools in this one-game tournament sample size, which is for all the marbles, which is what makes it so impressive and scintillating experience. But we got it this year. And it's exciting to see. But like I mentioned before, COVID is hanging over the NCAA March Madness tournament. And why is that an issue, you may ask? Why does he keep mentioning COVID, man? You talked about, we finally got the tournament. We finally got the tournament, Shaq. We finally got a tournament. Why are you talking about COVID? It's because it's the sad reality. And the fact that we are still getting a tournament doesn't mean that there aren't any complications that go along with it. And in regards to this tournament, we got a pretty decent basketball team that's facing some challenges already. So for those of you that have not seen or heard, the Virginia Cavaliers had to go home early from the ACC tournament due to the COVID outbreak inside of their organization. So at that school, the basketball team had a COVID outbreak, and it forced them to withdraw from the ACC tournament. Georgia Tech went on to win that tournament, and Virginia was still able to get a number 4 seed. However, they will be facing Ohio, which is going to be a pretty tough game if we're being quite honest. Ohio is not a team that I would want to face under many circumstances, let alone the one that Virginia is facing. But they're supposed to play them on this upcoming Saturday. However, Virginia has not even traveled to Indianapolis yet. The majority of the other teams left earlier today and have already arrived in Indianapolis and are settling in, have had a morning walkthrough or a practice. And Virginia is still not able to go or travel because they're still quarantining from the COVID outbreak. Now, plans are for them to still be able to make the game this Saturday, but that is putting a challenge on this team, and we're all holding our breath and hoping that we aren't seeing our first cancellation and having the Virginia Cavaliers bounce from the tournament due to the COVID outbreak. One could only hope that the Cavaliers are able to play this Saturday, but we shall see. When asked about it earlier, there were reports that the Cavaliers are just remaining sharp and hopeful that they will get the chance to play this Saturday, and they have a lot of senior leadership that they're going to rely on to be able to hold this team together when it comes to facing the Ohio Bobcats. Now, as we look deeper into this bracket, the story on everybody's mind and the reason why everybody watches March Madness is for these buzzer beaters, these Cinderella stories. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to get into later the top Cinderella stories of all time in NCAA history, and we'll go through a list, and I'll let you know if I agree or disagree with them. But for the moment, just looking at this year's bracket, I figured today would be a great time to go through, as we were just now tipping off in the first 4. If you haven't filled out your bracket already, shame on you. But we're going to go through today and go through the NCAA bracket and go through some of the key matchups in this first segment to see if there are any chances of any upsets within this first weekend. Now, just opening up the bracket and whatever application you may be using, you're looking at half these teams this year, and you're probably like, man, I haven't had a chance to watch a single game. And that's okay. I mean, who's to blame you? A lot of our sports are just returning this year, and a lot of the sport leagues are trying to make up for last year's losses of tournaments, games, leagues, matches, whatever they may be. So we're kind of getting double dose of a bunch of things, i.e. the Masters tournament. So you may have missed watching Creighton randomly on a Tuesday this year, or you didn't get to catch Villanova or Winthrop or Purdue or North Texas, but we got you covered, because I'm going to go through this bracket right now, and me, Shaq Scott, I love basketball. I watch it all. All of it, on a random Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I got all the applications, ESPN, CBS, All Access, everything I need to watch my sports, I got it. So I'm going to go through, and we're going to go through our brackets together, and you may have a couple times, a little bit of time if you haven't already. There are a couple of applications that still let you turn in your brackets pretty late, and I'm going to go through and give you my picks on who I think are going to be the big upsets for this first weekend. And then when we come back next time, you hear me, we'll go through and see how right I was on these predictions. So going through, we got our top 4 seeds this year. We got Gonzaga, Baylor, we got University of Michigan, and then we also have Illinois. So I know you're like, man, Big Ten doing pretty good this year. We got Illinois and Michigan in as number 1 seeds. Yeah, we do. And this is also a year you got to keep in mind that we don't have Duke and Kentucky. Duke and Kentucky not in the NCAA tournament. Who could have guessed? Duke and Kentucky not in the NCAA tournament. They weren't even close this year. Both had very, very rough seasons. And Coach K, if you haven't heard, but earlier this year was quoted as saying that this was a very weird year, and he didn't even believe that the season should be played at all. The kids weren't ready. It wasn't fair to them. And recently in his post-game press conference, as his team wasn't able to finish out the ACC tournament with the championship, he was saying that this is the team that he believes he's asked the most out of. So to not have a Duke and Kentucky in the NCAA tournament is very strange. But nonetheless, that allows us to have a Michigan and an Illinois, and it's still going to be a great tournament. So going through these number 1 seeds, Gonzaga is undefeated. So they have not lost a single game this year. And I don't know about anybody else, but I have a hard time going with Gonzaga. So they're the overall number 1 seed, but I have a very tough time just saying, you know what? Gonzaga's going to run the table this year. They're going to go completely undefeated, and they're going to win it all. I do not see that this year. So I'm already marking Gonzaga off on my bracket. I'm not saying they're going to lose in the first round. I do not foresee that, but I do not see them winning it all this year. I do not see them having a chance to win it all. However, there is a number 1 seed that I am pretty high on. It's not Gonzaga. It's not Baylor. It's not Illinois. It's Michigan. Michigan is very, very impressive. I love this Michigan Wolverine team. They have the nostalgia of the Fab Five with Juwan Howard being the head coach. Jalen Rose is tweeting about him. Chris Webber is even talking about going back to the games. It is a great opportunity for history to repeat itself with the Michigan Wolverines making it all the way to the national championship this year and winning it all. And I totally could see that. So Michigan is an early favorite for me. They're awaiting the winner of that first 4 game between Texas and Southern. But we shall see if they're able to run the table. And I do believe that Michigan is going to run the table this year and go all the way to the NCAA tournament championship and win it. Win it all. Why not? Why not? Moving along in the bracket, we got Illinois playing against Drexel in the first round. I don't foresee that being a matchup that we'll have to worry about as far as number 1 seeds losing. So I do, and Baylor's going to play against Hartford. And I don't see any of our number 1 seeds going down in the first round like we've seen in years past. It's very rare for it to happen, but I do not see it happening this year. So I do believe that all of our number 1 seeds are going to be safe this year. So I got Baylor, Gonzaga, Illinois, and Michigan advancing in the first round. Not a surprise there, not an upset. But as I go through the rest of this bracket, if I had to pick some sleepers, some underdogs, there are some teams that I'm looking at that are very appealing this year. And I mentioned Creighton earlier. And they're playing against UCSB. So UC Santa Barbara. They're playing against UC Santa Barbara. And I'm not sold on Creighton. I believe that our first upset that we are going to see is going to be that 12-5 matchup. That's always a matchup that you got to watch out for. That UC Santa Barbara and that Creighton 12-5 matchup, Creighton being in 5 seed, I do believe that they're going to lose this weekend. And I don't believe they're not going to be the only team to lose this weekend in the west side of our NCAA bracket, men's bracket. I believe that COVID in the end is going to be too much for Virginia to overcome, and the Ohio Bobcats are going to pull off the upset and upset Virginia as well. As shocking as that may seem to some, it's just going to be very, very tough, and I don't see Virginia being able to overcome all these challenges in the regular season and not be able to finish their ACC tournament, and then on top of that, they haven't had a practice in over a week and a half, and they're going to be expected to go out and play against the Ohio Bobcats, a team that's hungry, that ended their season on a pretty high note, and beat them. I don't foresee that happening. I do not. I'm sorry, but I do not foresee that happening, and I do believe the Ohio Bobcats are going to pull off the upset this weekend of the Virginia Cavaliers, along with UC Santa Barbara knocking off Creighton. Now, those are two big upsets that I picked, and as I go through the rest of this bracket in this first round, nothing else stands out to me. You know, we got the 7-10 matchup with Oregon and VCU. I'll go through a couple of these pretty quick. Kansas, the 3-14 versus Eastern Washington. I don't see that happening. Iowa versus the Grand Canyon Antelopesmen. I don't see that happening. Ohio State versus Oral Roberts. No, I don't see that happening. Florida versus Virginia Tech. That is a 7-10 matchup. But if Virginia Tech manages to pull that off, I don't see that as too much of an upset. Arkansas and Colgate. I got Arkansas taking that one. Texas Tech and Utah State. Got Texas Tech taking that one. Purdue and North Texas. Purdue taking that one. Oh, would you looky here. As I say, I don't see another upset happening. My eye falls on this 12-5 matchup again between Villanova and Winthrop. Villanova and Winthrop. Will I have the guts to call this upset? Answer is no, folks. I'm going with Villanova on that one. Villanova's going to take that one as well. I'm sorry I don't see it. Then we got North Carolina and Wisconsin. I got North Carolina taking that one, and Baylor and Hartford. Baylor in a landslide. And then we go to the Midwest bracket and the east side of the brackets. We'll just go to the 5-12 matchup on so we can make do on time. And we'll look at, for the east side of the bracket, we got Colorado versus the Georgetown Bulldogs. Ooh, hang on. And Tennessee versus Oregon State. Now, I said I don't have the guts to call that 5-12 matchup in the east bracket between Winthrop and Villanova. However, on this east side, I got Colorado and Georgetown. And those of you that didn't watch the Georgetown Bulldogs get into the tournament, they won their conference championship. Patrick Ewing has the boys playing hard. And I can see the Georgetown Bulldogs pulling off the upset here. Question is, will I call it? The answer to that question is yes. We'll do it. Why not? Lock it in. Sound the horns. Georgetown's going to pull the upset of Colorado. We got Georgetown knocking off Colorado. Book it in the first round. And as far as the upsets, that's where I think the upsets are going to stop. I don't foresee any other upsets happening in the rest of this tournament. So to recap, well, at least in the first round, to recap, we got Georgetown knocking off Colorado in the East Division. I got Creighton losing to UC Santa Barbara in the West Division. In the South Division, I don't have Villanova losing to Winthrop. Villanova's going to pull that one off. And then in the Midwest, we also decided that I don't see any upsets happening in that side of the bracket as well. So book it. book those upset victories we have. We got Georgetown pulling off the upset. I got Michigan winning it all. That's was my early pick before the season. I still got that going forward. What say you? What do you think? Do you believe I'm completely insane? I'm wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about, or can you see the same thing happen? Like I told you before, I watch basketball. So now, before you challenge my opinion, you gotta at least have watched as much basketball as me. Who else can say that on a random Tuesday they sit down on their couch with a bowl of cereal and will turn on ESPN Plus to watch Wichita State play, to watch Drake play, to watch UCF play? I will. I have. So you got to watch as much basketball as me before you challenge my opinions. But I welcome those opinions nonetheless. We appreciate you guys for listening. So, as we wrap up this first segment of the podcast, we're going to take a quick break. But on the other half of this break, we're going to get into our second big topic of the day and why the NBA may be loosening these COVID protocols. And what does that mean for your favorite NBA player and the NBA as a whole as we see it? We'll catch you guys on the other half of this break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. I am your host, Shaq Scott. We appreciate you guys for listening. So far in the show, we've talked about the NCAA tournament. Today marks the start of March Madness. As you can tell, I'm very, very excited. One shiny moment is playing in all of our heads right now. It's playing in all of our cars. It's playing on all of our TVs. We cannot wait to watch the Cinderella stories make their attempt at the big dance. It started today. We already saw Drake knock off Wichita State at the time of this taping of this podcast. I got Georgetown pulling off an upset this weekend, amongst other upsets happening this weekend. But as we go forward with our show, to keep on the topic with basketball, we go forward with the NBA. And recently, there was an article that came out today. Let me pull it up here, get the exact quote here. And the article goes as stated. And this is from Scott Palesic. Make sure I'm pronouncing his name correct. Scott Palesic. And this is from Bleacher Report. NBA, and the NBA Players Association agree to relax COVID-19 restrictions for fully vaccinated people. And the article goes as follows. As vaccines ramp up across the country and within the NBA in an effort to counter the COVID-19 pandemic, the league has reportedly agreed to ease certain restrictions. According to Baxter Holmes of ESPN, the NBA and NBA Basketball Players Association decided they will relax restrictions for those in the league who have been fully vaccinated. Teams were informed via a memo sent out Wednesday night. Holmes noted the changes are for players and personnel who are 2 weeks past their final dose and any team where 85% of players and 85% of staff are fully vaccinated. Those who meet the criteria can have indoor visitors at home and on the road without extensive testing, can dine outdoors at restaurants, and will not have to quarantine following exposure. Teams that are fully vaccinated will have more opportunities to leave their hotels on the road, dine indoors, and be inside practice facilities without wearing masks. One Western Conference head athletic trainer, echoing others in health circles around the league, said there is hope that the new benefits will help serve as a motivating factor for those who may be considering being vaccinated. So, with the NBA campaign, yep. So, what does this mean for the NBA and why is this important? Well, as we all know, as a country as a whole and the world as a whole, we were all smacked in the face by the COVID-19 pandemic. And not to make light of it at all, it was a very, very, and still remains a very, very serious pandemic. And for the sports world as a whole, a lot of people marked the beginning of the seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic when the NBA season shut down. So, now we fast forward a year later, and almost a year to the date in which Rudy Gobert was announced that he tested positive with COVID-19. We fast forward a year later, and the NBA is in talks of possibly loosening these COVID-19 protocols as a vaccine has been rolled out. Now, the vaccine has been a hot button topic amongst the world and society, and we're not here to give our political opinions on that. But what that means for the NBA is that they are trying to encourage NBA players, according to this article, that if they, and personnel and coaches and trainers, that if they are willing to get vaccinated, they will not have to abide by these strict COVID protocols. Some of those protocols have included thus far players not allowed to leave the hotels, having to pick from a very condensed version of a food menu, and not allowing an extensive amount of family members or friends or visitors whenever they are having guests in town. And some of these arenas aren't allowing fans at all. So a lot of these arenas are just now getting around to the idea of letting limited capacity for their particular and separate teams. So the idea of a vaccine is hoping to entice the NBA players to maybe, if you get vaccinated, we can loosen up the protocol. So the NBA is flat out saying, look, you scratch our backs, we'll scratch yours. So we hear you complaining about the idea of like, we're tired of being treated like babies. We're tired of being stuck in these bubbles. We thought the bubble ended last year. Yes, you're letting us travel. We're traveling to these different arenas, but then we're stuck inside the hotel, so I might as well be in a bubble. I have to wear a mask everywhere I'm going, but I'm playing on the same court without masks with these same people I have to wear a mask around anytime I'm not on the court. So what's the point of me wearing a mask if I'm still going to go out and play on the court with them? I'm getting tested every single day, multiple times a day. It's a lot, and it's taking a toll on players. And speaking of players that it's taking a toll on, another article came out today in which the Toronto Raptors' Fred VanVleet details his times that he had with COVID-19. Actually, this came out 2 days ago, and this is via Tim Reynolds and the Associated Press. I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from this article. Fred VanVleet has been giving out a lot of hugs lately for the simple fact that he's thrilled to know the worst of his COVID-19 experience is now over. VanVleet and three other Raptors, Pascal Siakam, Malachi Flynn, and Patrick McCaw, were back with the team for practice Tuesday after missing more than 2 weeks for virus-related symptoms. Siakam, Flynn, and McCaw are questionable to play Wednesday in Detroit. VanVleet and OG Anunoby are likely to remain out until at least Friday's home game in Tampa, which is funny to say, versus Utah. VanVleet was quoted as saying, and this is the part of the article that stuck out to me, "I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I'm here, I'm alive, I'm breathing, and I know there's a lot of people that didn't make it through COVID. So my thoughts and my heart are with the families and people that have been affected by the thing that weren't as fortunate as I was, as I am. It's been a rough stretch for everybody, not just the guys that were locked up. The rest of the guys that are trying to put the pieces together, I feel for them." That was in response to the team having to play without several of their stars. Being away from the game, Fran VanVleet reflected on it saying, "I forgot how much I love this stuff, man. I really love the game. I really love basketball. I really love being in the gym. I don't always love everything that comes with it, but I really love the game. It's just a blessing to be back." And again, that's from Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press. So I say all that to say, Fred VanVleet did not have a great time with COVID. He detailed the severity of his symptoms and how he felt. And for him to simply say, "I wouldn't wish this on anybody, any of my worst enemies," is a very powerful statement. We watched Karl Anthony Towns tragically lose several members of his family, one of those being his own mother, to the COVID-19 virus last year. And then he himself got COVID-19. He's been detailing the PTSD he's been suffering just from the idea of losing his family members, and then himself getting COVID-19, it being a tough thing to deal with. So the idea of NBA players still playing in the pandemic, trying to entertain the fans, trying to feed their families, and playing the sport that they love most importantly, But trying to do that all in the midst of also having to fight the virus is an impossible and daunting task. So, we now have a possible solution. The NBA and our health officials have presented a vaccine, and the NBA is trying to entice these players by saying, hey, you guys want to stop having to potentially quarantine for 2 weeks or missing time on the court. We can stop all these extra precautions if you just take the vaccine. Just take the vaccine, and you won't have these issues. Get tested. I mean, you won't have to get tested as often. I'm sure the testing protocols will still be in play, but there won't be as strict protocols in which the NBA players are used to having when they play on these road trips. If you think about it from a grand scheme already, let's take a bigger picture. I just quoted Fred VanVleet of the Toronto Raptors. Toronto is currently playing their home games in Tampa, Florida. Tampa, Florida. The Toronto Raptors are in Tampa, Florida because the country of Canada said, hey, you guys are going to try to play an NBA season in the middle of a pandemic. We do not want teams flying in and out, further spreading the virus here in the country of Canada. So if you want to have the Toronto Raptors, they're going to be the Tampa Raptors, and they're not coming back to Canada until we figure this out. Now, I can only guess that if the Toronto Raptors had, the city of Toronto had been maybe presented this idea of the fact that, what if we get all of our Raptors vaccinated? Possibly we'll be allowed to stay in Toronto then. It's not a guarantee they would have said yes, but it would have been an interesting proposition. But we do have that proposition now. And it's not just for the Raptors, it's for all NBA teams. You got the chance to get vaccinated, and the idea of you getting vaccinated is going to reduce the amount of time that you're going to have to spend in quarantine inside the hotel. Now, you may not ever be able to go back. I won't say ever, but for the time being, go back to where on the average NBA player would get to their city of choice. Say you got the Toronto Raptors and they just flew into Miami. The game's on Friday, they flew in on Wednesday. They may spend Thursday going out and hanging out before. Of course, they have their practice and the team film sessions, but these are grown men. And they're grown men with lives and money, a lot of it. So they're going to want to live their lives. And to have all that shut down right now in the middle of a pandemic is very tough. Especially from the outside looking in, they're doing all the quote-unquote proper things to do in the middle of this pandemic. And then a team like Tampa, Raptors, are in the city of Tampa, and they're looking around and they're watching spring breakers wash upon the shores of Tampa, Florida, maskless. And this is not a political opinion. This is just based off of observations from the media. You can pull up any local Florida newspaper right now and watch the plethora of spring breakers that are down in the state of Florida. Florida does not have the strictest COVID protocols right now. Right now, actually, there is not a mask mandate for the entire state. A lot of businesses have been given the approval to open up 100%. So a lot of this is going on in the face of the NBA teams and NBA players, and they're saying, hey, man, this multi-million-dollar business doesn't care about it. Why do us as a league still have to tiptoe around the fact that I got to wear a mask around my fellow NBA player or my teammate, and I'm spending all day on the court with him? I'm at practice without a mask on. I'm on the court sweating and breathing, but yet I'm sitting here having to wear a mask in and out of hotels. I can't leave my hotel. I can't see my family. I can only see 1 or 2 members of my family. It's already bad enough I can't go to my favorite cities and look forward to seeing my friends at the games, but I'm having all these restrictions instilled upon me. The interesting part of the idea of a vaccination for these NBA players is, to me, is all in the hands of one NBA player. LeBron James. LeBron James is the face of the NBA now and quite possibly could be for the foreseeable future. The man is making moves on and off the court consistently. He's going to be the star of the movie Space Jam later this year. He's reportedly part of the Fenway Sports Group and the purchasing of the Boston Red Sox. So this man has very calculated decisions in his life every single day and all of his movements on and off the court. So I do find it quite interesting that LeBron James has stayed pretty quiet on the idea of vaccinating himself and his family. And you may recall a couple of weeks ago, he was asked about the idea. Hey, LeBron, are you considering getting the vaccination? His flat out answer, and I'm paraphrasing here, was that I believe that's something that's going to be private. It's going to be a discussion between me and my family, and if we feel it's appropriate, that'll be something that's done privately between us, me and my family. And now from the outside looking in, you may say, oh, that's just a nonchalant answer. But I looked a little bit deeper into that. LeBron could have easily right then in the moment said, yes, I'm getting the vaccine, or no, I don't trust the vaccine. Either or. He could have said it right then in the moment. But that is a man who has realized the power of his words. Now in the past, maybe we're looking at a 19, 20-year-old LeBron. He's like, heck no, man, I'm not getting no vaccine. Or he may say, yeah, man, I'm tired of this. I want to hang out with my friends again. I want to be able to hang out with my family in between games. I'm absolutely going to get a vaccine. But this LeBron is a lot more calculated. And the NBA is begging for a player of LeBron's caliber to take the stand and say, yes, please, I'm going to get the vaccine, and so should you. There's a lot of hands in this pot. The general public, let alone the league as a whole. And I do, going through this article, some of the things would be enticing to me. If I were to put myself in LeBron's or any of these NBA players' shoes and they were to tell me, if you can go out and get the vaccine, you won't have to worry as much about wearing masks at all times inside their practice facilities, and you're not quarantining, and you can dine outdoors at restaurants, and you won't have to do as much extensive testing on the road, and you can have indoor visitors. Those things will be enticing to me, especially a lot of the players who had to go through what they went through in the Walt Disney World Resort bubble last year. It was pretty tough. And on the other side of it, you look at it from the NBA's perspective, we've already canceled cancel is a strong word. We'll use the term postponed because we don't know what some of these games may be rescheduled. Some have already been rescheduled. But 31 NBA games have already been postponed as of February 28th, this NBA season. 31. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's great considering all the games that are played on a daily basis. But 31 NBA games have been postponed, which is a lot. It's a lot of shifting around. And it just is a further reminder that we aren't in normal times. So why not do everything we can to get back to normal times? Maybe that is getting a vaccine. Maybe that is a player of LeBron's caliber saying, you know what, I'm going to be the face of the NBA. I'm going to get vaccinated. I guarantee if that happened, I could see a Ja Morant getting vaccinated. I could see a Zion Williamson getting vaccinated. I could see a Jason Tatum getting vaccinated. A Jaylen Brown, Damian Lillard. I won't say Damian Lillard. He beats the beat of his own drum, and that's where I expect him. But a lot of NBA players will follow suit. Patrick Beverley said it best. This LeBron league. Whatever LeBron say goes. If LeBron want us to play, we're going to play. LeBron don't want us to play, we're not going to play. And that was in regards to LeBron threatening on walking out of the NBA bubble last year. So we shall see. One could only hope that I, from a fan's perspective, just want to watch basketball and as much basketball as I can and in as much of a normal circumstance as I can. So if I can sit back and you tell me, you know what, Shaq, you're going to get to watch your NBA games with the crowd because the crowd's vaccinated, the players are vaccinated, or whatever is other protocols or solutions are coming up with in upcoming months or time span to be determined. It's going to allow you to watch your quote-unquote old NBA basketball games again. I'm all for it. Sign me up in a heartbeat. Let me see it. I'm waiting. I'll take it. We've already got the great NBA legends, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and we've noticed him and we've seen him in these campaigns for the vaccination. So the NBA is doing their part. And I don't believe it's for a political reason. I don't believe they're saying, we are leaning towards this side of the political party. I do believe they are hoping to get back to quote unquote as normal as possible. And they see the vaccine as a way to do that. And by enticing the NBA players, hopefully by saying, hey, if 85% of the players and 85% of the staff are fully vaccinated, you know what? Don't worry about wearing your mask as much in the player facilities. You can have that pregame dinner at Prime 112 in Miami and not be stressed out about the idea of, you broke COVID protocol, now you got to quarantine for 2 weeks. Or if you're Lou Will, maybe you can go back to the strip club and get some of those lemon pepper wings. Well, I can't judge. I can't judge either way, I can't judge, He said the wings were good there, so they might have been good there. Either way, bring back normal basketball 2021, and please consider these all NBA players. I just encourage you, and consider it. Just consider it, because at the end of the day, if there ever were to be a commissioner who I would believe to have my interest at the forefront, it would be Adam Silver. It would be different if this was a situation with the NFL who has had issues with the trust between the NFL Players Association and the owners. The NBA is on a different. They're on a different side of this. They're they got a little bit more trust with the NBA Players Association. I'm not saying there's a complete trustworthy relationship, but there's a lot more trust there. The NBA players got a lot of say-so into what happened in the bubble last year with the statements that were protected on the courts and the ideas of what they wanted to put on the back of their jerseys. And a lot of these owners were given some initial pushback, but eventually decided to trust the players, and it all worked out for the better. We got the finish of a great NBA season last year. It may not have been during a normal time span, but we did get to see a great finish to the NBA season. And we got another great NBA season ongoing right now. We've even had an All-Star game. And if you would have asked me at the beginning of this year if we would have had an All-Star game, I said absolutely not. We're just happy to have a season. But we've got an All-Star game. Now we got the chance to have a quote-unquote normal rest of our NBA season with the NBA presenting this idea to the players, get vaccinated. Please consider it. Just consider the idea of getting vaccinated. And maybe, just maybe, we can go back to things being normal. Now, before we jump to our next segment or to the next hot topic, we are going to take a quick pause here. But I just want to remind you folks, and thank you again as always for listening to the GSMC Sport Podcast. I'm your host, Shaq Scott. On the other half of this break, we're going to get into the NFL. We're going to discuss Deshaun Watson, and not for the reasons you may believe. It's a hot button topic. Deshaun Watson is in the news all day, every day right now, leading up to today for trade talks. We're right in the middle of NFL free agency, and we're all expecting any day now possibly for Deshaun Watson to be on the news. But that's not why he's in the news today. And if you can't tell by my somber tone, it's not for the best news. We will get into that on the other side of this break. Thus far in the show, we've already covered the NCAA tournament, and we just went over the COVID-19 NBA potential protocols being lifted with the idea of vaccinations being on the horizon for the NBA. But as always, like I mentioned before, we thank you for listening, however you may be listening. And this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. On the other half of this break, we'll get into Deshaun Watson, and we're also in the show with a bang as we talk about the top 20 Cinderella upsets of all time. Who doesn't want to relive history and talk about some of the great Cinderella stories and the great buzzer beaters? I know I do, and I know you do. And we'll get into all that and more on the other half of this break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. I am your host, Shaq Scott. We appreciate you for listening. Before we jump into our next topic today, we want to recap real quick. We first started our show off with a bang. We talked about our excitement for the NCAA tournament. We're in the middle of March Madness. It kicked off today. We went over some potential upsets and Cinderella stories for this upcoming weekend. We then dived into the NBA and how the COVID-19 protocols potentially could be loosened, all hinged upon the NBA players possibly getting vaccinated and what that could mean for the NBA going forward. And then now we're going to head on over to NFL and get into some NFL news. And I know you may be saying, oh, cool, we about to get right into NFL free agency. Not quite, because just as I was prepared to come in here today and give you an update on NFL free agency and what to expect, all that was breaking today, this Thursday, was the news out of Houston and Deshaun Watson. And no, the news is not about a potential trade for Deshaun Watson. However, There is a reported article out, and I will preface all of this by saying this is all an alleged account. There aren't any criminal charges being filed at this particular moment. This is all civil charges, and these are all alleged accounts. But per Sarah Barshop of ESPN, she posted an article this morning, and it goes as such. A third civil lawsuit filed against Deshaun Watson accuses the Houston Texans quarterback of sexually assaulting a massage therapist, allegedly forcing her to have lewd acts with him in December of 2020. The lawsuit was filed by Houston attorney Tony Busby on Wednesday night and appeared on the Harris County District Clerk's website Thursday morning. Busby said on Instagram on Thursday that there are 9 total cases against Watson. So far, only 3 civil lawsuits have been filed. The previous 2 lawsuits were related to 2 separate incidents during which he is accused of committing civil assault by touching a massage therapist inappropriately. Reached via text message later Thursday, Busby told ESPN that his office has been in contact with police and it will be sending a package to them with information related to all 9 cases. As far as NFL spokesman goes on the matter Thursday, Brian McCarthy said the matter is under review of the league's personal conduct policy, and the Texans said they will stay in close contact with the NFL during the league's investigation. Watson's behavior is part of a disturbing pattern of preying on vulnerable women, the third lawsuit reads. Now, this article came out this Thursday on the day of the recording. However, on Tuesday, Deshaun Watson posted on Twitter to get ahead of this, saying that a baseless 6-figure settlement demand was made by Tony Busby, who is the lawyer for the alleged victims, demanding a 6-figure settlement, and that this whole entire lawsuit that Deshaun Watson is ongoing and deciding to go through litigation in this process and seeing it through is about clearing his name, and that he's looking forward to doing that. At the time of the statement, Deshaun Watson said he had not seen the first lawsuit. This is a direct quote from Deshaun Watson. I have never treated any woman with anything other than the utmost respect. However, the third lawsuit alleges that Watson sent a direct message to the plaintiff over Instagram and scheduled a massage for December 28th at an office building. And then the article goes on to detail what exactly happened in this alleged interaction. I won't go into the details of that. However, I will go through what I believe to be an important factor of this article, apart from the alleged victims and what they had to encounter. The NFL informed us Thursday that they will conduct an investigation into the allegations made in the civil lawsuits filed against Deshaun Watson, the team said. We will stay in close contact with the league as they do. We continue to take this and all matters involving anyone within the Houston Texans organization seriously. We do not anticipate making any additional statements until the NFL investigation concludes. Wow. Now, that is a lot. I know I just read a lot. That is a lot to unpack, a lot to uncover. That's not the Deshaun Watson news I was expecting to get. When he posted to Instagram on Twitter, and I did notice this happen on Twitter in the moment when he posted that there are baseless claims being made against him, and he's about clearing up his name, and that all this is for money, and that the lawyer representing these victims is trying to demand he tried to demand a 6-figure settlement, and that's the whole purpose of this entire lawsuit. So when all this happened on Tuesday, I'm scrambling my brain trying to prepare myself for what the news is going to be, not expecting to see this come out today, and that there is 3 lawsuits coming out on Deshaun Watson for his alleged involvement in sexual harassment or sexual assault with these alleged victims. And there's 9 potential victims overall, but 3 have agreed thus far to be a part of the lawsuit. So it's a lot to unpack here. It's a very unfortunate situation. If this is a situation, and if any part of this, these actions are true, our hearts do go out to the victims of this, and we hope that justice is served for all parties involved of the alleged incident. However, what I want to take a look at here is the timing of this. So, Deshaun Watson is at a very pivotal point in his career. If you don't recall, the Houston Texans start the year with the new head coach. They fired Bill O'Brien. Actually, you know what? Let's rewind. Let's go all the way back. Let's go back to last year. In March last year, the Bill O'Brien-led Houston Texans traded away DeAndre Hopkins, setting off a dumpster fire of fireworks and emotions from a plethora of players, both in that organization and, quite honestly, outside of the organization, looking like, what the heck is going on in Houston? Why are they trading away their number one option right now? Like, we're going to really trade away DeAndre Hopkins and leave Deshaun Watson running for his life in that backfield and maybe left with one skilled player, if that. And that's exactly what they did. And as we kind of fast forward that timeline a little bit, Deshaun Watson still has a pretty good year in spite of all these circumstances. But Bill O'Brien does not survive the upcoming offseason, and he gets fired. And the Houston Texans bring in a new quarterback. I'm sorry, apologies. Freudian slip there. They bring in a new coach in hopes of wooing Deshaun Watson to stay. Because throughout this whole entire process, Deshaun Watson made it very clear that he was not happy with the way things played out, and he wanted to move on in hopes of giving a chance with another organization. So we fast forward our timeline, and there's been some talks between Deshaun Watson and the Houston management and coaching staff, and they've been doing some quote-unquote moves to impress him and try to flirt with him to entice him to stay. Doing all these things, and it's not working. Deshaun has been very steadfast in saying that, please let me go. I'm not interested in being the quarterback for the Houston Texans. The Texans are saying, we have no plans of trading Deshaun Watson. Deshaun said, I have no plans of playing for the Houston Texans. So it's all been a huge cluster of emotions and transactions and not transactions. So it's been a dumpster fire, to say the least. And all that's coming to a head now with these alleged allegations against Deshaun Watson. The timing of it is very, very interesting, as this is a very pivotal point for Deshaun Watson's career. Now, several things could happen here. So, we don't want to make any of these assumptions at the expense of the alleged victims in this incident. So, to protect the justice being served for all parties involved in this alleged incident, we're going to only discuss the impacts of this on the franchise from a Deshaun Watson perspective on the outside looking in. And we can use precedent. So we can look at situations in which this has happened before. Unfortunately, this is not a one-off thing that we have never seen in the NFL before. Quite recently, we've seen this happen with Antonio Brown and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you may recall, Antonio Brown had a crazy offseason, to say the least, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ended up on the Oakland Raiders, where we had a helmet incident. Then he ended up on the New England Patriots. They ended up being cut by the New England Patriots after it came out that he allegedly sexually assaulted a massage therapist of his own. The Patriots decided that it was not worth it anymore, let him loose, in addition to those allegations and some other incidents that had happened with Antonio Brown. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ended up taking a flyer on him and quote-unquote letting the justice system play out before they made any rash, whether to keep or release Antonio Brown, and quite honestly, possibly ending his career at the time. And they decided to keep him around, and he finished out the season. And he's a Super Bowl champion now. He was actually helpful, had a couple big catches along the playoff stretch for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it seems that all of that seemed to be a mask or some deodorant over the situation in which he was ongoing, because that case was still happening throughout the process. Now, there were some court dates that were pushed back to allow Antonio Brown and his defense to better prepare arguments, but that is a situation that was ongoing and was always a cloud over Antonio Brown. But it didn't stop anything. He still got a chance. So I'm asking myself here as I'm watching this situation play out, and it's still very early stages of it, so I want to let all of the factors come out and all of the facts come out of this situation. What are the Houston Texans going to do with Deshaun Watson? They're already saying we don't want to let him go. He's our starting quarterback going forward. But this seems like more of a headache than anything. If there ever was a time for you to let him go, now would be the time. We see players get let go for much less, and yet you're still going to attach yourself to a guy who already doesn't want to play for you, and now you got this stain on your organization with these alleged crimes happening. Will the Houston Texans stick with Deshaun Watson and let the due process play out while he's still a quarterback, and I say that with quotations, for the Houston Texans? Or will they finally say, you know what, we'll trade him for pennies on the dollar right now because we don't want to deal with this PR nightmare. This is somebody else's problem. Y'all deal with it. You do what you want to do. And I was wondering if there was even going to be a trade market. And before that thought could even leave my head, Adam Schefter reported today that he reached out to several league executives, and they expressed that regardless of the circumstance, there is still a big interest in Deshaun Watson in the trade market, which says a lot for me. It says a lot. It says that his value is high, and that the NFL has shown a precedence of we saw how we deal and are dealing with these situations when it comes to alleged sexual assaults and sexual harassment allegations in the past. The NFL tends to take the approach of, we're going to take our step back and let the due process play out. And you can have whatever feelings you may have about that, but that's just the way the NFL has decided to do things. I'm not expressing whether I completely agree with that or I disagree with that. This is just the NFL's perspective on that. So it does not surprise me at all to hear Adam Schefter report that the NFL is saying that, you know what, Deshaun Watson, I hear you. We see all these things ongoing, and the NFL is conducting their own personal conduct policy and investigation into this. But we're still going to take a flyer, and if I'm a team like the Miami Dolphins, I want to have Deshaun Watson as my quarterback, and in spite of all of this. Now, the other factor that is still out there is that if the NFL does their own investigation apart from the civil lawsuit and finds any reason that Deshaun Watson acted against the NFL's code of conduct, Deshaun Watson can and will be suspended. This is a possibility. And the NFL has had missteps in the past when it comes to judgments on players' transgressions and the public perception of that. And a key incident I always go back to when I think of the NFL acting upon players' transgressions in the past is Ray Rice and how they handled the Ray Rice situation. There's documentaries have been made about how the NFL handled the Ray Rice situation. And I do believe that in situations like this one, it's always in the back of their mind that, we don't want to have another Ray Rice situation in which we make a decision, the public is not happy with our decision, we try to make a stronger punishment, and then we end up putting ourselves in a hole because we're double jeopardying, if that's even a word, double jeopardying is going to be today, double jeopardying an NFL player that already has been punished. The NFL is very cognizant of the fact of that, so they're very cautious, and they like to wait for the facts to play out. So I do believe that's what's going to happen here. But if you're a Houston fan, man, oh man, can you not catch a break? You already lost Deshaun. You already are probably going to lose Deshaun Watson this year. However this plays out, I do not see Deshaun Watson playing another game in a Houston Texans uniform, regardless if he is found guilty by the NFL, if he ends up settling outside of court in this civil suit, however this may play out. I do not see Deshaun Watson playing another game from the Houston Texans. You lost your franchise face, your staple, J.J. Watt. Man, J.J. Watt is in Arizona. He's taking ice baths, showing you that he's going to do cryotherapy in actual ice. He's flying on the jet with the Arizona Cardinals owner. He's recruiting players. It was been reported today that A.J. Green signed in Arizona. So now he's got an offense over there. He's making googly eyes on Twitter to the news of potential other NFL free agents coming to play with J.J. Watt over in Arizona. And it's tough, man. It's like watching an ex-girlfriend just flaunt her boyfriend all over Instagram right in front of your face. She's taking pictures. They're going to France. They're going to Dubai. And they're tagging pictures. And they're doing everything but tagging you in the pictures. And you're just looking at what could have been. And it was all good less than a year ago. All good for you less than a year ago. Deshaun Watson was an MVP candidate. DeAndre Hopkins was DeAndre Hopkins, a beast. And you just were waiting for J.J. Watt to get healthy. And hopeful that, we got a young core. All we got to do is continue to build around it. We'll get a stronger offensive line, and we're going to be contenders. It's not the case. Fast forward to 2021, Deshaun Watson is on his way out. J.J. Watt wants nothing to do with you. And you're just sitting there just holding, looking, concerned, don't know what to do. A dumpster fire is an understatement. All we can do is continue to watch and let it play out, man. This is interesting. Interesting to say the least. If you were a Texans fan or the Texans organization, what would you do? That's the last question I ask myself. If I'm sitting there and I'm head of the Texans and I got this situation in my lap, what do I do with Deshaun Watson? What do I do in general? And if I'm the person in charge, I want nothing to do with this. You got to go, Deshaun. This gives me all the reason to let you go. He already doesn't want to play for me. He already doesn't want to play for me. And if, apart from me losing him possibly to suspension and then not getting anything from him, because if he's suspended, that's probably going to lead to less teams wanting and being willing to trade for him. I would rather just trade him now before all of this plays out and it gets worse. Plenty of suitors out there. Plenty of teams that will love Deshaun Watson. And I'm sure he can get back a decent enough deal, some draft picks, something that'll make you happy in the long run. Because you're in rebuilding phase, whether you realize it or not, Houston. You are in rebuilding phase. And I'm a person who's lived in Florida my whole entire life, a fan of all of the local teams, was a kid, grew up watching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so I know what rebuilding feels like. Trust me, I know exactly what it feels like. It's tough. It's tough. But you know what? I don't know what it feels like to have a quarterback. And you had one. Well, I didn't know what it felt like until this year. But I didn't know what it felt like for years to have a quarterback. I had Jameis Winston. My hopes lied on Jameis Winston. But you had Deshaun Watson, and he doesn't want to be there anymore. Time to let him go. Get some potential draft picks. Who knows what the future holds for you? But don't hold on to him. Let the NFL investigation play out, and then you end up losing him for the year, or say he gets suspended 4 to 6 games, and now you got a situation where you got a quarterback who doesn't want to play for you. He's suspended, so you don't got as much suitors that you got, and now you're just stuck. Trade him now. Get rid of him. Let him go. Trade him away. Somebody else's problem. That's exactly how I look at it. Somebody else's problem. Pittsburgh Steelers did it. Oakland Raiders did it. New England Patriots did it. Ended up being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' problem. It did work out for them, but it was somebody else's problem. Mike Tomlin loved Antonio Brown. You could not have found an interview years ago with him talking about how much he loves Antonio Brown and his character. But the second it got real in the field over there, Antonio Brown was out of there. Out of there. Bill Belichick is known as the personal conduct whisperer. He can take the troubled players and calm them down. He can take the biggest egos and they buy into the Patriots way. And they become different players, and they're men, and they feed into the system. And he had Aaron Hernandez and all of his transgressions on that team, and he was a Super Bowl champion. Antonio Brown came over there. Nah, bro, you got to go. I ain't putting up with this. You got to go. Unless you know, man, somebody else's problem. Get rid of him. Deshaun Watson, love him as a player. Love him as a player. Hope these allegations aren't true, but love him as a player. Houston Texans, let him go. All right, folks, before we head into our last segment of the podcast, we are going to take another quick break. What you can expect on the last segment, I've been teasing it all show long. I would be very, very remiss to not talk about the NCAA tournament a little bit more, but we talked about it earlier, about how it's starting today, and we reviewed a couple of the key matchups and some potential Cinderella stories this year. Then we got into the NBA and their COVID protocols and how they may be lessening those protocols. And then we just broke down the whole Deshaun Watson saga and the ongoing and upcoming information that has happened recently and what we could see in the future for the Houston Texans. But finally, we're going to end our show when we come back from this break with a much lighter topic of the top 20 Cinderella stories of all time. And we're going to go through, and I'll let you know if I agree or disagree. And we're just going to reminisce. We're going to go down memory lane. We're going to mentally play one shining moment in all of our heads. We're going to bob along. We're going to get happy. We're just going to go down memory lane, and we're going to remember some of these Cinderella stories, because we can hope, and I do believe that we're probably going to get a Cinderella story this year. If there ever was a time for one, this year would be the year. In the not normal NCAA tournament, we could get a Cinderella story this year. So we're going to go down memory lane and review some of the ones from the past. We'll catch you on the other half of this break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. I am your host, Shaq Scott. Before we wrap up today's show, as we get into the last topic of today's show, we've covered thus far the NCAA tournament. We went over the bracket in itself, some of the first four matchups that happened this evening. We went to the NBA, and we talked about the COVID-19 protocols possibly being loosened due to the COVID vaccine being rolled out and enticing some NBA players potentially of taking that COVID vaccine. Then we got into the somber topic of Deshaun Watson and the 3 alleged civil lawsuits against Deshaun Watson alleging sexual harassment and sexual assault. And then we're going to end today's show on a much lighter note, and I've been teasing it all so long. I'm very excited to finally get into the topic in honor of the NCAA tournament starting today. The top 20 Cinderella stories, upsets of all time. Man, it's been a long time coming. I don't know about you. I've been waiting since this moment since last year. We finally get the NCAA tournament, and I just can't wait to go down memory lane. I was just thinking to myself today, man, just thinking about some of those great teams of the past, and the last time I really sat down and enjoyed the NCAA tournament from the first 4 game all the way to the final 4 in the NCAA the championship. And I was thinking about some of those big games and upsets and buzzer beaters, and a couple games were coming to mind, and I was like, man, there were some good games in the tournaments. And as you look in the NBA and you see some of these NBA players who went on to have great careers, and you're like, oh, I remember when Mario Chalmers hit that big game-winning shot for Kansas, or when DeAndre Fox and Malik Monk were going against North Carolina getting their heart broken by Luke May. I remember things like that, and it just takes you down memory lane, and it's a good time. So I was thinking about a couple of big moments in March Madness history, and it sent me down a rabbit hole, and I came across this article from themedium.com. And this article is by Brandon Anderson, and this is a top 20 list of the biggest upsets in March Madness history. And I thought we'd go through it today and decide whether we agree or disagree with some of these, and maybe they left some of the games out that we have thought should have been in here. So to go through this list, I'm going to start with number 20 here, and they have number 10 Davidson versus number 2 Georgetown, 2008 second round. So for those of you who don't recall, this is 2008 now. So we're talking about quite a bit ago. And in 2008 Davidson team, you may be thinking, like, why is Davidson on the list? Who's the most common person you associate with Davidson whenever somebody mentions the team Davidson? Stephen Curry. Chef Curry. Steph Curry was on Davidson, running through the NCAA tournament, making a name for himself. And this was one of those marquee moments in which that put a stamp on his career. At the time, Davidson upset Georgetown. I believe Steph. I remember if I recall that game correctly, Steph went crazy in the second half. I think he had something like 25 points, and Davidson was losing throughout that game, and Steph ended up dropping 25 points in the second half to pull off the upset of Georgetown. They ended up beating Gonzaga. In that game, I remember Curry dropping something like 40 points, and they end up losing eventually in the Final Four. But Davidson was one of those Cinderella stories, man, that gets people hooked. 2008, I was still a pretty young buck, watching Steph Curry and emulating him on the basketball court myself and saying, man, I can't wait to play in the NCAA tournament one day. Unfortunately, that dream didn't happen, but I get to talk about it, and that's just as good. So, number 20, Davidson versus Georgetown. Steph Curry upsetting the Georgetown University. Number 23 here. Number 23. Number 19, we got Wichita State versus Gonzaga. In this game, I don't know if you remember that Wichita State team. They had some hoopers on that team. They had Ron Baker, who sniffed the NBA for a little bit. Clee Anthony Early. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but there's a big name that was on that team that I talked about earlier today. Fred Van Vliet was on that squad. Fred Van freaking Vliet was on Wichita State when they upset Gonzaga. It's part of the reason why I still don't trust Gonzaga to this day, because this game in particular busted my bracket wide open. And so whenever I see Gonzaga as a number 1 seed, I'm like, I'm a little bit cautious here, because I mentioned them Gonzaga losing to Steph Curry in 2008, and this is 2013. They lost to Wichita State. Never sold on Gonzaga, so Wichita State being upsetting Gonzaga is number 19. Boston, let's see what else we got here. We got 1994 Boston College upsetting North Carolina. Now, 1994, this will be a young Shaq. So I was barely of age to recall this game. This wouldn't be a game that I would have been watching live, but there are some big NBA names that I am recognizing on this list that were a part of that team. If we go and look back here, let's see who was on that 94 North Carolina squad. Rasheed Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse. So the fact that Boston College beat Rasheed Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse is impressive. 2 NBA veterans. Matter of fact, Jerry Stackhouse is a college basketball coach to this day right now. As we continue through the list, we got number 17. We'll go with, Wisconsin versus Kentucky. Now, this isn't a Cinderella, quote-unquote, story, to say the least. However, Kentucky was a huge favorite in this game, and I am a follower of Coach Calipari myself. When I played basketball in high school, I always would tell myself, I want to play for Coach Cal. At the time, he was coaching at Memphis, and you couldn't tell me I wasn't going to go to the University of Memphis and play for Coach Cal. He then ended up moving to Kentucky, so I followed him and been following him and Kentucky since. And this particular Kentucky team was 38-0, and they were ranked number 1. On this team was Karl Anthony Towns and Devin Booker, and they lost to Wisconsin. I was not very happy with that. Number 16, Norfolk State versus Missouri. That's the 15-2. This was impressive because Norfolk State was highly underdogs in this game and ended up beating the number 2 Missouri team. That Norfolk State team had Kyle O'Quinn on it, who I believe, he's still in the NBA to this day. Kyle O'Quinn in the NBA to this day, but they ended up beating the Missouri in 2012 in the first round. That was another bracket buster. Let's see what else we got here. We got Weber State versus North Carolina. This is a game from 1999. It's another game a little bit before my time. But Weber State, if you don't recall, that's a pretty big college town because they have a pretty big alum in the NBA right now. Quite arguably, one could argue is an MVP candidate, and Damian Lillard. So we got, and moving along in the list, we got Bucknell versus Kansas in 2005, the 14-3. Now, see, that's always a big upset. You got the 14 seed beating a number 3 Kansas seed. That was a pretty big matchup. It was also at the time Bucknell's first postseason win ever in the history of the program, and at the time their team was over 100 years old. First postseason win ever for the team, so that was big for many reasons. Moving along the list, they got Kansas over Oklahoma, 1988 national championship. A little bit before Shaq's time. And by Shaq, I'm referring to myself. But on that team, they have mentioned here is Danny Manning, who scored 31 points, 18 rebounds, and 5 steals, which is pretty impressive. They also have Cleveland State versus Indiana, 1986. LSU over Kentucky, 1986 as well. Now, this one right here sticks out for me. On this list, we got Lehigh, 15 seed over Duke, 2012 first round. Now, why does this one stick out? That 2012 Duke team featured a freshman phenom in Austin Rivers. Austin Rivers was a killer for the Duke Blue Devils. He hit a game-winning, one of his more impressive games of that season was him hitting that game winner in Chapel Hill versus the UNC Tar Heels for the win, hitting that 3. It was an impressive freshman season for him. But They went up against Lehigh that year, who was led by another NBA star, none other than C.J. McCollum. Yes, 3J C.J. McCollum dropped off 30 points on Austin Rivers and the Duke Blue Devils that year en route to upsetting them in the first round. Another one of those 15-2 matchups. It's a pretty big upset. Moving along in the list here from the medium, they got Richmond over Syracuse in 1991, another 15-2. Princeton over UCLA 1996. Florida Gulf Coast over Georgetown 2013. Now this one I do recall, and this one has a little bit more of a personal anecdote to me, because this Florida Gulf Coast team was known as Dunk City. That's when the birth of Dunk City happened. So Florida Gulf Coast was led by Brett Comer and Sherwood Brown and a bunch of quote-unquote no names for the masses. But for me personally, I grew up here in Orlando, Florida. And some of the players on that Florida Gulf Coast teams were public school players that gave myself and fellow teammates fits in local tournaments or for the high school I attended at the time. So to watch these guys on the big stage of the college tournament beating a number 2 Georgetown was a huge thing for me. There was no jealousy, no envy, but I was legit in awe, and they had my full-fledged support to watch these guys that I grew up playing against beating some of the quote-unquote best in the NCAA at the time, with the Georgetown Hoyas, who were a number 2 seed that year. They beat them. It was capped off with a bunch of dunks and alley-oops, and they had the swagger. They made it all the way to the Sweet 16 that year. It was a very, very impressive year, and I missed that Dunk City era, man. Florida Gulf Coast, it was a very fun run to watch them in that Dunk City era. Moving along in our list, we got they got Duke versus UNLV in 1991. That's the very infamous UNLV team that was led by Larry Johnson, Stacey Augmon, Greg Anthony, and it had the head coach, Coach Tark, who was known for chewing the towels. I remember that. We got Coppin State versus South Carolina, 1997. They got Santa Clara versus Arizona. Santa Clara, the reason why this stands out, they were a 15 seed led by the Brooklyn Nets head coach, Steve Nash. That's correct. Steve Nash led the Santa Clara over Arizona. In 2009, we got here Northern Iowa versus Kansas. Northern Iowa versus Kansas. And if I recall, I'm trying to remember, that was a 9 versus a 1, and it was a close game. Oh, and I do recall this moment because Kansas was the number 1. They were the number 1 overall seed, so it was a shock for all of us to watch them lose in the second round. And we're going to I'll fast forward to the end of this list to see who their number 1 is, and we'll end off today's show with whether or not we agree, and maybe they missed a couple that we don't see mentioned here, because there's a couple that I think symbolize March Madness that I don't see on here. The number 1 being Villanova versus Georgetown, the 1985 national championship, led by Patrick Ewing, who was in the tournament again, this time as a coach. Maybe those Georgetown Hoyas could be on this list, an updated version of this list. You know, they're a 12 seed this year. Who knows? I picked them to upset in the first, to pull off the upset in the first round earlier in the show, so it could be. But at the time, Georgetown was upset by Villanova in this 1985 national championship. Patrick Ewing was a dominant player, went on to be the number 1 draft pick, but they end up losing. To Villanova. Villanova won it all that year. Very, very shocking. So, there's one that sticks out to me that I don't see on here that I believe should be definitely mentioned. So, I don't know if you recall, but George Mason was a team that was a force to be reckoned with for a while, and I want to say it was in 2006. They ended up beating the number 1 seed at the time, the UConn Huskies, that were led by Rudy Gay. And George Mason managed to beat them, and I believe that to be one of a very pivotal NCAA March Madness moments that could have been arguably one of the number 1 moments that we see here. And as I think about the number 1 moments of March Madness that did happen, I can't but also wonder, what about those that could have been? And one that sticks out for me, and I mentioned before that I grew up in Florida, being a Florida boy my whole entire life. the UCF Knights managed to make it to the NCAA tournament, which was already impressive in itself. The Knights aren't a team that has been to the tournament quite that often. They hadn't been in quite a while. And they went against the Duke Blue Devils. And they ended up losing on a last-second tip-in that was missed by R.B. Dawkins at the time. And that would have been an upset of a Duke Blue Devil team led by Zion Williamson, which had been super impressive. Super duper impressive. But it didn't happen, to say the least. But if I had to pick a number one March Madness moment for me all time, and keep in mind, I'm 28 years old, grew up in the 90s, 2000s is when I really entrenched myself in the basketball and college basketball. I've been watching basketball since the early 90s, but college basketball really was kind of instilled upon me in the early 2000s. So if I had to rack my brain of a pivotal NCAA March Madness moment, which one would it be? And today I will have to go to it's so many to choose from, because I think about Carmelo Anthony winning it all as a one and done, and I was one of the popular college one and dones that we've seen, and the Kevin Durant not being able to pull it off, the Michael Beasleys, the Blake Griffins, all these great names that had great one-year teams but weren't able to get it done in the tournament. And I'm trying to think, but you know who stands out for me? Sister Jean. Sister Jean. For those of you that may not recall, Sister Jean, and I'm pulling up here because I want to get all the facts right for good old Sister Jean. Sister Jean is 101 years old this year, and she is a super duper fan of Loyola Chicago. And this year she got approved to travel to the NCAA tournament to watch Loyola Chicago in the NCAA tournament. And last time we saw Loyola Chicago, in the NCAA tournament was in 2018. And for those of you that may not recall, Sister Jean was a star, man. Sister Jean was on TV every day. Every day Sister Jean was on TV, rooting on Loyola. 98 years old at the time. 98. But at the time, Loyola beat the Miami Hurricanes. That was a huge upset. And then they went and beat the Tennessee Volunteers. And both those games were decided by 3 points or less. So that's just, in essence, lets you know, like, how valuable this NCAA tournament is. And for us to have it back again, we got to relish in this, man. We got to relish in it. So here's to a great NCAA tournament happening this year. Maybe we get a lot more Sister Jean. I'm always down for some Sister Jean airtime. I love seeing Sister Jean on TV. Hearing her talk, she's 101 years old. I'm sure she's following all her proper protocols. Hopefully so. Sister Jean might be vaccinated for all we know. She's out there in Indianapolis watching Loyola Chicago play this upcoming weekend. We may get a Cinderella story. What do you think? Do you think they're going to be another Cinderella story? You think we're just going to have the typical all four number one seeds in the Final Four? I don't foresee that. We went through this list before, and I told you Gonzaga is known for blowing it when they get the number one seed, and they got it this year. They got the overall number one seed, and I don't see them pulling it off. I got the Michigan Wolverines winning it all, but I do see some some upsets happening this year and some underdog stories. Either way, man, I'm just happy to have the NCAA tournament back. And I'm happy to have had you this evening or this morning, however you may be listening. Again, we thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sport Podcast, brought to you by the great folks over at the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, we thank you for listening, however you may be listening. We just ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review for us. That really helps us out. Spread the word to your friends. Let them know that you listening to this really cool podcast and so really young, exciting host with some interesting takes. And make sure you give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we'll be sure to interact and engage with you in the comments. And we'll just have a great time together. But as always, folks, I thank you for joining us today. And don't forget to tune in to the NCAA tournament happening this weekend. A lot of big games happening. Make sure you tune in. Get your feedback. Use my predictions for or against me. The next time you hear my voice, I could be bragging. I could be eating some humble pie. Who's to say? But make sure you tune in to the GSMC Sport Podcast. If you don't watch the sports, we got you covered because we're going to talk about it the next time you hear from us. I thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.